The world operates on a lekai. It is a fundamental, almost physical deception that structures everything from the price of bread in your local grocery store to the trillion-dollar derivatives market that underpins global banking. This deception is the illusion of infinite trust, embodied in the single greatest financial mechanism ever created, the petrodollar system. But the clock has run out. The sound you hear echoing across the world's financial centers is not a momentary tremor. It is the definitive crack of a breaking foundation. The system specifically designed by powerful architects decades ago for one purpose: terminal instability and the frictionless transfer of generational wealth. For 50 years, the American dollar has enjoyed a status unrivaled in history, protected not by economic productivity or fiscal prudence, but by a simple, brutal geopolitical agreement. Oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, must be priced and settled exclusively in dollars. This mandate, established in the aftermath of the 1970s oil crisis, did more than merely stabilize U.S. currency. It forced every nation, friend or foe, to continuously hold and demand vast quantities of dollars, essentially exporting America's inflationary pressures and underwriting its staggering debt load. It was the ultimate financial protection racket, a shield that made the United States immune to the natural laws of currency decay that govern every other nation. Yet, this shield was always temporary. It was not a perpetual motion machine, but a mathematically unstable construct. The architects of this system, the financial dynasties, the central bankers, and the political elites who negotiated these hidden treaties, knew its lifespan was finite. They designed it to serve a period of aggressive global expansion and financialization, understanding that once the geopolitical conditions shifted, the mechanism would violently reverse. That reversal is upon us. The agreement that sustained the dollar's impossible dominance has been breached. The Saudi-US 1974 Security Agreement, the unspoken charter of the petrodollar, was allowed to expire without renewal. A quiet, almost dismissive event that carries the financial weight of an atomic bomb. When Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the entire edifice, opens the door to accepting UN, euros, or any other currency for its oil, the forced global demand for the dollar collapses. The game is instantly and irrevocably changed. This is not a theoretical economic debate. It is a financial fact, a piece of architectural engineering whose supports have just been removed. The dollar's purchasing power, its liquidity, its entire global utility, is now set to deflate domestically with the mechanical precision of a reverse siphon. The decades of accumulated debt, once absorbed by the world's compulsory dollar holdings, will now rush home to be denominated and dealt with exclusively by the American people. This is the moment the architects planned for the stage, where the ultimate collapse of the currency begins, setting the conditions for the final, most egregious wealth transfer from the unprepared, many to the hyper-aware few. The petrodollar system didn't just die. It completed its mission. Its death is the final trigger, confirming that the current financial stage is not a recession, but a structural disintegration. This is the hidden truth about the dollar's destiny, a trajectory that few in the mainstream are willing to acknowledge, yet one that will define the rest of your financial life. Now, let's deconstruct the architects, the blueprints, and the final stages of the collapse we are currently living through. To understand the present danger, we must look not just at the petrodollar, but at the century-long design process that culminated in its creation. The American dollar's dominance was not a naturally occurring phenomenon. It was a carefully constructed, multi-stage imperial finance project initiated in the shadows of two world wars. This historical deconstruction reveals the precise patterns of wealth concentration and financial warfare that inevitably lead to systemic collapse. The first critical stage was the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913. While often presented as a measure to stabilize banking panics, its true function, according to historical documentation and deep analysis, was to consolidate monetary control away from democratic oversight and into the hands of a few powerful banking families. This act provided the necessary mechanism, the ability to create currency and debt ex nihilo, to fund the massive expansion of the state and finance the ensuing global conflicts. This centralization of power was the prerequisite for all future financial imperialism. The second stage was the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. Emerging victorious from a global conflict that had decimated the industrial capacity of every other major power, the U.S. was able to effectively dictate the terms of the post-war global financial order by linking the U.S. dollar to gold at a fixed rate, and then linking all other major world currencies to the dollar. The architects established the dollar as the de facto global reserve currency. Every transaction, every reserve holding, was now routed through the American monetary system. It was a Trojan horse of financial engineering, the appearance of stability underwritten by gold, while simultaneously allowing the U.S. to run increasing external deficits, printing dollars that the rest of the world was obligated to hold simply to function. But this system carried the seeds of its own destruction. The discipline imposed by the gold link was intolerable for the elites running the state, as it constrained their ability to wage war and expand the welfare warfare state infinitely. By the late 1960s, years of excessive military spending, most notably the Vietnam War and domestic social programs, led to an unsustainable amount of dollars held overseas. Foreign nations, particularly France under Charles de Gaulle, began demanding the exchange of their dollars for U.S. gold, threatening to drain the nation's reserves. The system was mathematically unstable. The solution, which marks the third and most audacious stage, was the infamous Nixon shock of 1971, when the gold convertibility of the dollar was unilaterally terminated. This event marked the final, irreversible transition from a currency backed by an objective, finite asset gold, to a pure fiat currency backed only by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, a promise of stability immediately undermined by the preceding default on the Bretton Woods Agreement. However, the world, which was deeply addicted to the dollar for trade, was left without a suitable replacement. The dollar's status was maintained by sheer inertia, but it required a new, artificial anchor. This is where the Petrodollar system of 1974 entered the stage, replacing the vanished gold link. The geopolitical architects, understanding that the value of money is predicated not on backing but on demand, secured the agreement with Saudi Arabia. Every barrel of oil demanded a dollar, creating an infinite, artificial, and compulsory global demand for the U.S. currency. This single arrangement transformed the dollar's instability, the risk created by unlimited printing, into a global export. Inflation became the world's problem, not just America's. The financial consequences were revolutionary. The U.S. could now fund perpetual war and ever-increasing debt without immediate domestic hyperinflation, effectively using the world's energy needs as collateral for its profligacy. This system, built on debt, geopolitical leverage, and the forced participation of the global economy, established the dollar's final, temporary, and supremely powerful form, a form whose mandated utility has just reached its expiration date. The petrodollar was the ultimate mechanism for imperial profit extraction, and its structural decay signals the end of this century-long financial era. The death of the petrodollar is not a random event. It is the mathematically certain outcome of the system's own design mechanics, a pattern repeated throughout history by every reserve currency that succumbs to the temptation of infinite expansion. The core financial pathology is the debasement mechanism, which transforms a national currency into a terminal global liability. The process operates with mechanical precision, driven by three inescapable financial forces that the elites understood and exploited. The first is the Triffin dilemma in the age of fiat. The Triffin dilemma states that a nation whose currency serves as the global reserve must continuously supply the world with sufficient liquidity dollars to facilitate global trade. To do this, the reserve country must run persistent trade deficits. It must buy more from the world than it sells. Under the petrodollar system, this necessity was amplified. The U.S. had to export massive amounts of currency to the world, essentially exporting IOUs to keep the wheels of global commerce turning. This means the U.S. dollar must be perpetually and systematically debased, as more currency is printed and sent overseas than is justified by the nation's productive capacity. The second force is the sovereign debt spiral. As the reserve currency issuer, the U.S. government discovered it had a bottomless pocket. Since the world was compelled to buy U.S. debt treasuries as the safest place to store their petrodollars, the political architects faced no immediate constraint on spending. This capacity was exponentially weaponized, starting with the shift away from gold. Every crisis, every war, every social expansion was funded by the issuance of more debt, creating a compounding interest liability that is mathematically impossible to pay back under current structures. The debt is no longer measured in trillions. It is an abstract, infinite number, necessitating that every future dollar must be printed to service the past debt. The only possible outcome is the continuous devaluation of the unit of account itself. This leads directly to the third and most critical force, the export and return of inflation. For decades, the petrodollar system acted as a global pressure valve. The trillions of new dollars created to fund U.S. deficits and buy oil were held overseas by foreign central banks and sovereign wealth funds. The resulting inflation, the loss of purchasing power from having too many dollars chasing a fixed amount of goods, was absorbed by the global economy. This mechanism allowed the U.S. to enjoy decades of low domestic inflation despite staggering fiscal irresponsibility. But the petrodollar's collapse means the pressure valve has been sealed shut. When the world's major energy producers and trading blocs, led by BRICS nations and facilitated by Saudi acceptance of non-dollar payments, no longer need dollars to buy oil, they no longer need to hold them. The vast oceans of parked dollars, the financial liability that the world absorbed, will begin the inevitable journey home. This is the great reversal. As foreign central banks slowly or suddenly liquidate their treasury holdings and convert their excess dollar reserves into assets or different currencies, the dollar supply domestically explodes. This returning liquidity creates a catastrophic imbalance. All that previously exported inflation rushes back to the source. Meeting a domestic economy already crippled by supply-side constraints and a massive debt load, the architects knew this endgame. This debasement is not a flaw, it is the final, engineered stage of the wealth transfer. When the dollar loses 50%, 75%, or even 90% of its purchasing power in a condensed time frame, those holding tangible, non-fiat assets land. Productive companies, hard commodities, and decentralized digital units will see their relative wealth multiply exponentially. Those dependent on dollar-denominated savings, fixed incomes, or wages will be systematically impoverished. The pattern is inescapable. Reserve currency status provides temporary, infinite power. But its end is always marked by the final, violent redistribution of wealth from the uninitiated majority to the elite few who mastered the mechanism. The petrodollar system was the vehicle. The death of the dollar is the inevitable destination, secured with mechanical precision and these three forces. The debasement is now an unstoppable chain reaction. The present danger is the speed of the great transition. We are no longer observing theoretical patterns. We are entering the definitive, irreversible stage of collapse, a stage that historical financial crises prove is characterized by rapidly accelerating systemic shock. The U.S. global economy is now exhibiting all the critical markers of a system entering terminal velocity, triggered by the petrodollar's demise. The single greatest indicator is the sudden, catastrophic fragmentation of global trust in the U.S. Treasury market. For decades, U.S. government debt was considered the ultimate risk-free asset, the foundation of global collateral. When nations were forced to hold dollars for oil trade, they naturally stored those dollars in treasuries. This created a self-fulfilling prophecy of safety. Today, that trust is dissolving. The sanctions weaponization of the dollar against geopolitical rivals, combined with the U.S.'s unsustainable debt trajectory, has created a definitive mandate for central banks across the globe to de-risk. They are actively seeking non-dollar denominated stores of value, most notably initiating a historic, synchronized demand for gold. As a financial investigator, I look at the data, and the data is screaming central banks have been net buyers of gold at unprecedented levels for several years. This is not an investment strategy. It is a defensive, strategic move by sovereign entities explicitly designed to shield national wealth from the collapsing purchasing power of the dollar reserve system. This accumulation of hard, non-fiat assets represents the tangible, physical dismantling of the U.S. financial hegemony. They are preparing for a post-dollar world, and they are doing it with accelerating urgency, knowing that when the official announcement of the petrodollar's replacement is made, the window for transition will violently close. The immediate consequence for the U.S. is a severe liquidity shock. As foreign buyers, the critical underwriters of U.S. debt for the last 50 years, step back, the Federal Reserve is forced to become the buyer of last resort. This means the U.S. must internalize its own debt problem. The Fed must print dollars to buy the vast quantities of debt the world no longer wants, directly monetizing the government's deficit spending. This shift creates a direct, instantaneous link between government profligacy and domestic currency debasement. The inflation that was once exported is now being printed directly onto Main Street, ensuring the acceleration of cost-of-living crises. Furthermore, the fragmentation of global energy trade is already creating a dual pricing system. Nations trading oil outside the dollar mechanism using local currencies, swaps, or bilateral agreements are effectively creating a new, more stable shadow market. This parallel structure exposes the dollar's vulnerability. For the first time since 1974, oil is being priced not just by demand, but by the currency in which it is purchased. This shift will rapidly erode the financial advantage the U.S. has long enjoyed. The global trade landscape is being permanently fractured, transitioning from a unipolar, dollar-centric system to a multipolar environment where no single fiat currency can command the automatic trust and demand that the petrodollar once enforced. This is the present danger, the final stage where the structural integrity of the reserve currency itself is sacrificed to maintain the facade of stability for the political and financial elites. They are actively choosing inflation and domestic debasement over the painful, systemic restructuring that would be required to genuinely stabilize the currency. We are living through the moment when the bill for decades of infinite expansion is presented, and the currency unit itself is the collateral being seized. The final stages of this mechanical collapse are characterized by market volatility, irrational asset bubbles, and a deep, systemic uncertainty, all signals that the architects are repositioning their own wealth for the coming inevitable currency reset. The collapse of the petrodollar and the subsequent debasement of the currency unit define the ultimate choice facing every individual navigating this profound financial transition. This is not merely an economic cycle, it is a forced wealth transfer. And the critical distinction lies in whether you profit from the inevitable collapse or are consumed by it. The historical pattern is clear in every instance of reserve currency failure. The system pivots from valuing fiat units cash, traditional savings accounts, bonds to valuing tangible scarcity and productive assets. The elite architects, who engineered the crisis through inflation and debt, are already positioned in these hard assets. Their goal is simple: to ensure that when the dollar's perceived value drops suddenly and dramatically, their wealth, denominated in real terms, sees an infinite increase relative to those holding the collapsing currency. The inescapable choice is therefore one of financial orientation. Remaining anchored in dollar-denominated financial instruments, the very liabilities the global system is shedding, is an active decision to participate in your own impoverishment. This includes traditional bank accounts, long-term government bonds, and any financial product reliant solely on the stability of the dollar's purchasing power. As the imported inflation rushes home, the value stored in these instruments will be systematically evaporated. To profit from the collapse means recognizing and utilizing the patterns of systemic instability. It involves shifting your focus to assets that benefit from scarcity, geopolitical fragmentation, and monetary uncertainty. This requires the clarity to view the current financial environment not as a period of turbulence to be weathered, but as a moment of critical structural change. Those who understand the mathematical certainty of dollar debasement will position their capital in areas that are non-fiat, non-political, and universally demanded. This is the final move in the game designed by the architects, securing your position before the last stage of the wealth transfer is complete, transforming impending systemic risk into unprecedented individual opportunity. The great deception of the petrodollar is over. The system designed to confer infinite power has completed its mission, transferring the bill for 5 decades of excess back to the American populace. We have deconstructed the century-long design process, analyzed the mechanics of mathematical instability, and identified the precise terminal stage of collapse we are currently enduring. Now, the analysis shifts from the historical narrative to the personal imperative. This knowledge grants a profound clarity, allowing you to see the financial world not as a complex, chaotic mess, but as a predictable, mechanical system engineered for this precise outcome. The panic is not yet fully manifest, but the transition is irreversible. The ultimate choice remains yours to leverage this profound understanding and profit from the inevitable collapse, or to remain unprepared and be consumed by the final erosion of the world's most powerful currency.